Welcome back to another Serial Killer Saturday. Today we are going to explore the highly profiled case of Ted Bundy. This gentleman has been highly requested, and I hope you settle in. This one is going to cover a lot. There are so many elements to this case, I did not want to leave anything out. Theodore Robert Bundy was born at the Elizabeth Lund Home for Unwed Mothers in Burlington, Vermont, to Eleanor Louise Cowell. While the identity of his father remains a mystery, Bundy's birth certificate lists a Lloyd Marshall, although Bundy's mother would later tell of being seduced by a war veteran named Jack Worthington. Bundy's family did not believe this story, however, and expressed suspicion about Louise's violent, abusive father, Samuel Cowell. To avoid social stigma, Bundy's maternal grandparents, Samuel and Eleanor Cowell, claimed him as their son. In taking their last name, he became Theodore Robert Cowell. He grew up believing that his mother was his older sister. Bundy biographers wrote that he learned Louise was actually his mother while he was in high school. For the first few years of his life, Bundy and his mother lived in Philadelphia. In 1950, Bundy and his mother, whom he still believed was his sister, moved to live with relatives in Tacoma, Washington. Here, Louise Cowell had her son's surname changed from Cowell to Nelson. In 1951, 1 year after their move, Louise met Johnny Culpepper Bundy at an adult singles night. In May of that year, the couple were married, and soon after John Bundy adopted Ted, legally changing his last name to Bundy. Johnny and Louise had more children, whom the young Bundy spent much of his time babysitting. Johnny Bundy tried to include his stepson in camping trips and other father-son activities, but the boy remained emotionally detached from his stepfather. Bundy was a good student in high school and was active in the local church, serving as vice president of the Youth Fellowship. He was also involved in a local troop of the Boy Scouts of America. Socially, Bundy remained shy and introverted throughout his high school and early college years. He would later say that he hit a wall in high school, and that he was unable to understand social behavior, stunting his social development. He maintained a facade of social activity, but he had no natural sense of how to get along with other people, saying, "I didn't know what made things tick. I didn't know what made people want to be friends. I didn't know what made people attractive to one another. I didn't know what underlay social interactions." Years later, while on Florida's death row, Bundy would describe a part of himself that from a young age was fascinated by images of sex and violence. In early prison interviews, Bundy called this part of himself the entity. While still in his teens, Bundy would look through libraries for detective magazines and books on crime, focusing on sources that described sexual violence and featured pictures of dead bodies and violent sexuality. Before he was even out of high school, Bundy was a compulsive thief, shoplifter, and on his way to becoming an amateur criminal. To support his love of skiing, Bundy stole skis and equipment and forged ski lift tickets. He was arrested twice as a juvenile, although these records were later expunged. In 1965, Bundy graduated from high school and was awarded a scholarship by the University of Puget Sound. He began in the fall, taking courses in psychology and Oriental studies. After 2 semesters, he decided to transfer to Seattle's University of Washington. Bundy worked at a grocery store, as well as other odd jobs. As part of his course of studies in psychology, he would later work as a night shift volunteer at Seattle's Suicide Hotline, a suicide crisis center that served the greater Seattle metropolitan and suburban areas. There he met and worked alongside former Seattle policewoman and fledgling crime writer Ann Rule, who would later write a biography of Bundy and his crimes, The Stranger Beside Me. He began a relationship with a fellow university student, whom he met while enrolled at UW in 1967. Following her 1968 graduation and return to her family home in California, she ended the relationship. Fed up with what she described as Bundy's immaturity and lack of ambition. Ann Rule states that around this time, Bundy decided to pay a visit to his birthplace in Burlington, Vermont. There, according to Ann Rule, he visited the local records clerk and finally uncovered the truth of his parentage. After his discovery, Bundy became a more focused and dominant person. In 1968, he managed the Seattle office of Nelson Rockefeller's presidential campaign and attended the 1968 Republican Convention in Miami. He re-enrolled at UW, this time with a major in psychology. He became an honors student and was well liked by his professors. In 1969, he started dating Elizabeth Klopfer, a divorced secretary with a daughter, who fell deeply in love with him. They would continue dating for 6 more years, until he went to prison for kidnapping in 1976. Bundy graduated in 1972 from UW with a degree in psychology. Soon afterward, he again went to work for the state Republican Party, which included a close relationship with Governor Daniel J. Evans. During the campaign, Bundy followed Evans' Democratic opponent around the state, tape recording his speeches and reporting back to Evans personally. A minor scandal later followed when the Democrats found out about Bundy, who had been posing as a college student. In the fall of 1973, Bundy enrolled in the law school at the University of Utah, but he did poorly. He began skipping classes, finally dropping out in the spring of 1974. While on a business trip to California in the summer of 1973, Bundy started dating his first girlfriend, who had dumped him from UW. He had a new life, a new look, and a new attitude, this time as a serious, dedicated professional who had been accepted into law school. Bundy also continued to date Klopfer. Neither woman was aware the other existed. Bundy proposed to the first girlfriend, and she accepted. 2 weeks later, however, shortly after New Year's Eve 1974, he dumped her, refusing to return her phone calls. A few weeks after this breakup, Bundy began a murderous rampage in Washington state. No one knows exactly where and when Bundy began killing. Many Bundy experts believe he may have started killing as far back as his early teens. Anne Marie Burr, an 8-year-old girl from Tacoma, vanished from her home in 1961 when Bundy was 14, though Bundy always denied killing her. The day before his execution, Bundy told his lawyer that he made his first attempt to kidnap a woman in 1969. And at one point in his death row confessions, Bundy said he committed his first murder in 1972. In 1973, one of Bundy's Republican Party friends saw a pair of handcuffs in the back of his car. He was for many years a suspect in the December 1973 murder of Kathy Devine in Washington state. But DNA analysis led to another man's arrest and conviction for that crime in 2002. Bundy's earliest known identified murders were committed in 1974 when he was 27. Shortly after midnight, on January 4th, 1974, Bundy entered the basement bedroom of 18-year-old Joni Lenz, a dancer and student at UW. Bundy bludgeoned her with a metal rod from her bed frame while she slept and sexually assaulted her with a speculum. Lenz was found the next morning by her roommates in a coma and lying in a pool of her own blood. She survived the attack, but suffered permanent brain damage. Bundy's next victim was Linda Ann Healy, another UW student and his cousin's roommate. In the early morning hours of February 1st, 1974, Bundy broke into Healy's room, knocked her unconscious, dressed her in jeans and a shirt, wrapped her in a bedsheet, and carried her away. Co-eds began disappearing at a rate of roughly one a month. On March 12, 1974, in Olympia, Bundy kidnapped and murdered Donna Gail Manson, a 19-year-old student at the Evergreen State College. On April 17, 1974, Susan Rancourt disappeared from the campus of Central Washington State College. Later, two different co-eds would recount meeting a man with his arm in a cast, one that night, one 3 nights earlier, who asked for their help to carry a load of books to his Volkswagen Beetle. Next was Kathy Parks, last seen on the campus of Oregon State University on May 6, 1974. Brenda Ball was never seen again after leaving the Flame Tavern on June 1, 1974. Bundy then murdered Georgianne Hawkins, a student at UW and a member of Kappa Alpha Theta, an on-campus sorority. In the early morning hours of June 11, 1974, she walked through an alley from her boyfriend's dormitory residence to her sorority house. She was never seen again. Witnesses later reported seeing a man with a leg cast struggling to carry a briefcase in the area. One co-ed reported the man had asked for help in carrying the briefcase to his car, a Beetle. Bundy's Washington killing spree culminated on July 14, 1974, with the daytime abduction of Janice Ott and Denise Nosland from Lake Sammamish State Park. That day, 8 different people told the police about the handsome young man with his left arm in a sling who called himself Ted. 5 of them were women, who Ted asked for help unloading a sailboat from his Beetle. One of them went with Ted as far as his car, where there was no sailboat, before declining to accompany him any farther. 3 more witnesses testified to seeing him approach Ott with a story about the sailboat, and to seeing her walk away from the beach in his company. She was never seen alive again. Nosland disappeared without a trace 4 hours later. King County detectives now had a description of both the suspect and his car. Some witnesses told investigators that the Ted they encountered spoke with a clipped, British-like accent. Soon, flyers were up all over the Seattle area. After seeing the police sketch and description of the Lake Sammamish suspect in both the newspaper and on television, Bundy's girlfriend, one of his professors, and former co-worker all reported him as a possible suspect. The police, receiving up to 200 tips per day, did not pay any special attention to a tip about a clean-cut law student. The fragmented remains of Ott and Nosland were discovered on September 7, 1974, off Interstate 90, 1 mile from the park. Found along with the woman's remains was an extra femur bone and vertebrae, which Bundy would identify as that of Georgianne Hawkins shortly before his execution. Between March 1st and March 3rd, 1975, The skulls and jawbones of Healy, Rancourt, Parks, and Ball were found. Years later, Bundy claimed that he had also dumped Donna Manson's body there, but no trace of her was ever found. Bundy smiles for the cameras and pleads not guilty during a press conference announcing his indictment on first-degree murder charges. That autumn, Bundy began attending the University of Utah Law School in Salt Lake City, where he resumed killing. Nancy Wilcox disappeared on October 2nd, 1974. Wilcox was last seen riding in a Volkswagen Beetle. On October 18th, 1974, Bundy murdered Melissa Smith, the 17-year-old daughter of Midvale Police Chief Lewis Smith. Bundy raped, sodomized, and strangled her. Her body was found 9 days later. Next was Laura Aim, also 17, who disappeared when she left a Halloween party in Utah on October 31st, 1974. Her naked, beaten, and strangled corpse was found nearly a month later by hikers on Thanksgiving Day on the banks of a river in American Fork Canyon. On November 8, 1974, Carol DeRonch narrowly escaped with her life. Claiming to be Officer Roseland of the Murray Police Department, Bundy approached her at the Fashion Place Mall, told her someone had tried to break into her car, and asked her to accompany him to the police station. She got into his car, but refused his instruction to buckle her seatbelt. They drove for a short period before Bundy suddenly pulled at the shoulder and attempted to slap a pair of handcuffs on her. In the struggle, he fastened both loops on the same wrist. Bundy whipped out his crowbar, but DeRonch caught it in the air just before it would have cracked her skull. She then got the door open and tumbled out onto the highway, thus escaping from her would-be killer. About an hour later, a strange man showed up at Viewmont High School in Bountiful, Utah, where the drama club was putting on a play. He approached the drama teacher and then a student, asking both to come out to the parking lot to identify a car. Both declined. The drama teacher saw him again shortly before the end of the play, this time breathing hard, with his hair mussed and his shirt untucked. Another student saw the man lurking in the rear of the auditorium. Debbie Kent, a 17-year-old Viewmont High School student, left the play at intermission to go and pick up her brother, and was never seen again. Later, investigators found a small key in the parking lot outside Viewmont High School. It unlocked the handcuffs taken off of Carol DeRonch. In 1975, while still attending law school at the University of Utah, Bundy shifted his crimes to Colorado. On January 12, 1975, Karen Campbell disappeared from the Wildwood Inn in Snowmass, Colorado, where she had been vacationing with her fiancé and his children. She vanished somewhere in the span of 50 feet between the elevator doors and her room. Her body was found on February 17, 1975. Next, Vail ski instructor Julie Cunningham disappeared on March 15, 1975. Then Denise Oliverson on April 6, 1975. While in prison, Bundy confessed to Colorado investigators that he used crutches to approach Cunningham after asking her to help him carry some ski boots to his car. At the car, Bundy clubbed her with his crowbar and immobilized her with handcuffs, later strangling her in a crime highly similar to the Hawkins murder. Lynette Culver went missing in Idaho on May 6, 1975, from the grounds of her junior high school. After his return to Utah, Susan Curtis vanished on June 28, 1975. Bundy confessed to the Curtis murder minutes before his execution. The bodies of Cunningham, Culver, Curtis, and Oliverson have never been recovered. Meanwhile, back in Washington, investigators were attempting to prioritize their enormous list of suspects. They used computers to cross-check different likely lists of suspects, classmates of Linda Healy, owners of Volkswagens, etc., against each other, and then identify suspects who turned up on more than one list. Theodore Robert Bundy was one of 25 people who turned up on 4 separate lists, and his case file was second on the to-be-investigated pile when the call came from Utah of an arrest. Bundy was arrested on August 16, 1975, in Salt Lake City for failure to stop for a police officer. A search of his car revealed a ski mask, a crowbar, handcuffs, trash bags, an ice pick, and other items that were thought by the police to be burglary tools. Bundy remained calm during questioning, explaining that he needed the mask for skiing and that he had found the handcuffs in a dumpster. Utah detective Jerry Thompson connected Bundy and his Volkswagen to the Duranch kidnapping and the missing girls and searched his apartment. The search uncovered a brochure of Colorado ski resorts with a check mark by the Wildwood Inn where Karen Campbell had disappeared. After searching his apartment, the police brought Bundy in for a lineup before Duranch and the bountiful witnesses. They identified him as Officer Roseland and as the man lurking about the night Debbie Kent disappeared. Following a week-long trial, Bundy was convicted of Duranch's kidnapping on March 1, 1976, and was sentenced to 15 years in Utah State Prison. Colorado authorities were pursuing murder charges, however, and Bundy was extradited there to stand trial. On June 7, 1977, in preparation for a hearing in the Karen Campbell murder trial, Bundy was taken to the Pitkin County Courthouse in Aspen. During a court recess, he was allowed to visit the courthouse's law library, where he jumped out of the building from a second-story window and escaped, but sprained his ankle during the jump. In the minutes following his escape, Bundy at first ran, then strolled casually through the small town toward Aspen Mountain. He made it all the way to the top of Aspen Mountain without being detected. There he rested for 2 days in an abandoned hunting cabin, but afterward, he lost his sense of direction and wandered around the mountain, missing 2 trails that led down off the mountain to his intended destination. At one point, he came face to face with a gun-toting citizen who was one of the searchers scouring Aspen Mountain for Ted Bundy, but talked his way out of danger. On June 13, 1977, Bundy stole a car he found on the mountain. He drove back into Aspen and could have gotten away, but 2 police deputies noticed the Cadillac with dimmed headlights weaving in and out of its lane and pulled Bundy over. They recognized him right away and took him back to jail. Bundy had been on the lam for 6 days. He was back in custody, but Bundy worked on a new escape plan. He was being held in the Glenwood Springs, Colorado jail, where he awaited trial. He had acquired a hacksaw blade and $500 in cash. He later claimed the blade came from another prison inmate. Over the next 2 weeks, he sawed through a small metal plate in the ceiling, and after dieting down, he was able to fit through the hole and access the crawl space above. An informant in the prison told guards that he had heard Bundy moving around on the ceiling during the night before his escape, but the matter was not investigated. When Bundy's Aspen trial judge ruled on December 23, 1977, that the Karen Campbell murder trial would start on January 9, 1978, and changed the venue to Colorado Springs, Bundy realized that he had to make his escape before he was transferred out of the Glenwood Springs jail. On the night of December 30th, 1977, Bundy dressed warmly and packed books and files under his blanket to make it look like he was sleeping. He wriggled through the hole and up into the crawl space. Bundy crawled over to a spot directly above the jailer's linen closet. The jailer and his wife were out for the evening, so he dropped down into the jailer's apartment and walked out the door. Bundy was free, but he was on foot in the middle of a bitterly cold, snowy Colorado night. He stole a broken-down MiG, but it stalled out in the mountains. Bundy was stuck on the side of Interstate 70 in the middle of the night in a blizzard, but another driver gave him a ride into Vail. From there he got a bus to Denver and boarded the TWA 8:55 a.m. flight to Chicago. The Glenwood Springs jail guards did not notice Bundy was gone until noon on December 31st, 1977, 17 hours after his escape, by which time Bundy was already in Chicago. Following his arrival in Chicago, Bundy then caught an Amtrak train to Ann Arbor, Michigan, where he got a room at the YMCA. On January 2nd, 1978, he went to an Ann Arbor bar and watched the University of Washington beat Michigan in the Rose Bowl. Later, he stole a car in Ann Arbor, which he abandoned in Atlanta, before boarding a bus for Tallahassee, where he arrived on January 8, 1978. There, he rented a room at a boarding house under the alias of Chris Hagen and committed numerous petty crimes, including shoplifting, purse snatching, and auto theft. He stole a student ID card that belonged to a Kenneth Misner and sent away for copies of Misner's Social Security card and birth certificate. He grew a mustache and drew a fake mole on his right cheek when he went out. But aside from that, he made no real attempt at a disguise. Bundy tried to find work at a construction site, but when the personnel officer asked Bundy for his driver's license, Bundy walked away. This was his only attempt at job hunting. 1 week after Bundy's arrival in Tallahassee, in the early hours of January 15, 1978, 2.5 years of repressed homicidal violence erupted. Bundy entered the Florida State University Chi Omega sorority house at approximately 3 a.m. and killed 2 sleeping women, Lisa Levy and Margaret Bowman. Bundy bludgeoned and strangled Levy and Bowman. He also sexually assaulted Levy. Additionally, he bludgeoned 2 other Chi Omegas, Karen Chandler and Kathy Kleiner. The entire episode took no more than a half an hour. After leaving the Chi Omega house, Bundy broke into another home a few blocks away, clubbing and severely injuring Florida State University student Cheryl Thomas. On February 9, 1978, Bundy traveled to Lake City, Florida. While there, he abducted, raped, and murdered 12-year-old Kimberly Leach, throwing her body under a small pig shed. On February 12, 1978, Bundy stole yet another Volkswagen Beetle and left Tallahassee for good, heading west across the Florida Panhandle. On February 15, 1978, shortly after 1 a.m., Bundy was stopped by Pensacola police. When the officer called in a check of the license plate, the vehicle came up as stolen. Bundy then scuffled with the officer before he was finally subdued. On his way to jail, Bundy said, "I wish you would have killed me." At his booking, Bundy gave the police the name Ken Misner and presented stolen identification from Misner. But the Florida Department of Law Enforcement made a positive fingerprint identification early the next day. He was immediately transported to Tallahassee and subsequently charged with the Tallahassee and Lake City murders. He was later taken to Miami to stand trial for the Chi Omega murders. Despite having 5 court-appointed lawyers, he insisted on acting as his own attorney. He even cross-examined witnesses, including the police officer who had discovered Margaret Bowman's body. 2 pieces of evidence proved crucial. First, Chi Omega member Nita Neary, getting back to the house very late after a date, saw Bundy as he left and identified him in the court. Second, during his homicidal frenzy, Bundy bit Lisa Levy in her left buttock, leaving obvious bite marks. Police took plaster casts of Bundy's teeth, and a forensics expert matched them to the photographs of Levy's wound. Bundy was convicted on all counts and sentenced to death. After confirming the sentence, the judge gave him the verdict. It is ordered that you be put to death by a current of electricity. That current be passed through your body until you are dead. Take care of yourself, young man. I say that to you sincerely. Take care of yourself, please. It is an utter tragedy for this court to see such a total waste of humanity as I have experienced in this courtroom. You are a bright young man. You'd have made a good lawyer, and I would have loved to have you practice in front of me. But you went another way, partner. Take care of yourself. I don't feel any animosity toward you. I want you to know that. Once again, take care of yourself. Bundy was tried for the Kimberly Leach murder in 1980. He was again convicted on all counts, principally due to fibers found in his van that matched Leach's clothing and an eyewitness that saw him leading Leach away from the school. He was sentenced to death again. During the Kimberly Leach trial, Bundy married former co-worker Carol Ann Boone in the courtroom while questioning her on the stand. Following numerous conjugal visits between Bundy and his new wife, Boone gave birth to a daughter in October 1982. However, in 1986, Boone moved back to Washington and never returned to Florida. Her whereabouts and those of Bundy's daughter are unknown. While awaiting execution in Stark Prison, Bundy was housed in the cell next to fellow serial killer Otis Toole, the murderer of Adam Walsh. FBI profiler Robert K. Ressler met with him there as part of his work interviewing serial killers, but found Bundy uncooperative and manipulative, willing to only speak in the third person and only in hypothetical terms. Ressler spoke of his impression of Bundy in comparison to his reviews of other serial killers. This guy was an animal, and it amazed me that the media seemed unable to understand that. However, during the same period, Bundy was often visited by Special Agent William Hagmeyer of the FBI's Behavioral Sciences Unit. Bundy would come to confide in him, going so far as to call him his best friend. Eventually, Bundy confessed to him many details of the murders that had until then been unknown or unconfirmed. In October of 1984, Bundy contacted the former King County homicide detective, and offered to assist in the ongoing search for the Green River Killer by providing his own insights and analysis. The detective traveled to Florida's death row to interview Bundy. He later stated that these interviews were of little actual help in the investigation. They provided far greater insight into Bundy's own mind. However, they were primarily pursued in the hope of learning the details of unsolved murders which Bundy was suspected of committing. The day after he was sentenced to death for the murder of Kimberly Leach, Bundy contacted the same detective again. At that point, his appeals were exhausted. Bundy had beaten previous death warrants for March 4th, July 2nd, and November 18th, all of 1986. With its execution imminent, Bundy confessed to 8 official unsolved murders in Washington state, for which he was the prime suspect. Bundy told the detective that there were actually 5 bodies left on Taylor Mountain, not 4, as they had originally thought. Bundy confessed in detail to the murder of Georgianne Hawkins, describing how he lured her to his car, clubbed her with a tire iron that he had stashed on the ground under his car, drove away with her in the car, and later raped and strangled her. After the interview, the detective reported that he had been shocked in speaking with Bundy, because he was the kind of man who was born to kill. Bundy described the crime scene where Janice Ott, Denise Noslin, and Georgianne Hawkins had been left. And it was almost like he was just there, like he was seeing everything. He was infatuated with the idea because he spent so much time there. He's just totally consumed with murder all the time. Bundy had hoped that he could use the revelations and partial confessions to get another stay of execution, or possibly commute his sentence to life imprisonment. At one point, a legal advocate working for Bundy asked many of the families of the victims to fax letters to the Florida governor and ask for mercy for Bundy in order to find out where the remains of their loved ones were. All of the families refused. Bundy gave scant detail about his crimes during his confessions, but he promised to reveal more and other body dump sites if he were given more time. The ploy failed, and Bundy was executed on schedule. The night before Bundy was executed, he gave a television interview to James Dobson, head of the Christian organization Focus on the Family. During the interview, Bundy made repeated claims as to the pornographic roots of his crimes. He stated that while pornography did not cause him to commit murder, the consumption of violent pornography helped shape and mold his violence into behavior too terrible to describe. He alleged that he felt that violence in the media partially sexualized violence and sent boys down the road to becoming Ted Bundys. In the same interview, Bundy stated, "You are going to kill me, and that will protect society from me. But out there are many, many more people who are addicted to pornography, and you are doing nothing about that." Bundy had contemplated suicide in the days leading up to his execution, but eventually decided against it. At 7:06 a.m., January 24th, 1989, Ted Bundy was executed in the electric chair at Florida State Prison in Stark, Florida. His last words were, "I'd like to give my love to my family and my friends." Then more than 2,000 volts were applied across his body for less than 2 minutes. and he was pronounced dead at 7:16 a.m. Several hundred people were gathered outside the prison and cheered when they saw the signal that Bundy had been declared dead. There is so much more to this case if you choose to pursue it, but for the sake of time, I will leave you with just a few more disturbing facts I found about Bundy. Bundy's Aunt Julia recalled a disturbing incident with her young nephew. After lying down, Julia woke to find herself surrounded by knives from the kitchen, and 3-year-old Ted was standing by the bed, smiling at her. In a letter written shortly before his escape from the Glenwood Springs jail, Bundy said, "I have known people who radiate vulnerability. Their facial expressions say, 'I'm afraid of you.' These people invite abuse. By expecting to be hurt, do they subtly encourage it?" When Florida detectives asked Bundy to tell them where he had left Kimberly Leach's body for the family's solace, Bundy allegedly said, "But I'm the most cold-hearted son of a bitch you'll ever meet." In previous episodes of Serial Killer Saturday, I, as well as you subscribers, have contemplated what exactly it is that creates a serial killer. Is it genetics? Abuse? Some sort of chemical in the brain that is off-balanced? I think in this case, as one detective stated, Ted Bundy was born to kill. It should also be noted that Zac Efron just recently signed on to play Ted Bundy in an upcoming movie. That should be interesting. If you have a serial killer you would like to see featured here, please contact me through any of my social media links or email me at DuchessDark676@gmail.com. See you next time.